Here, the furthest point downstream, which could be easily forded, there grew up a hamlet called Glasgow. Today, Glasgow is Scotland's largest city and its industrial capital. The centuries-old booth still stands foursquare in what was once the heart of Glasgow. The present-day city centre lies a mile or so further west, a network of busy streets dominated not by a steeple, but by banks, insurance offices and commercial buildings. But the skyline is a changing one, in keeping with changing times. Multi-story buildings are going up year by year in the centre of the city. Among them is skyscraper College Block. Glasgow has a population of over 1 million, greater than that of Edinburgh, Aberdeen and Dundee put together. 1 person out of every 5 in Scotland lives in Glasgow. More than any other place in Scotland, Glasgow is a bridge city. The Clyde can be crossed by road and rail at close on a dozen points. Glasgow is Scotland's most important route centre. From its terminal railway stations, lines radiate in all directions like the spokes of a wheel. Though our railways are no longer the solid cornerstone of Britain's transport system that they once were, Glasgow still handles more passengers and freight than any other Scottish centre. Like other major cities, Glasgow is served by an airport situated conveniently on its doorstep. By air, Glasgow is only 40 minutes from Inverness, 80 from London. This Aer Lingus plane left Dublin just an hour ago. Glasgow's airport is the 3rd busiest in Britain and handles close on 1 million passengers every year. Scotland's largest city, Scotland's industrial capital, Scotland's busiest road, rail and air centre, St. Mungo's City. Just how and why and when did all this come about? The church played a very important part in the development of medieval Glasgow. In the 12th century it became the seat of a bishop, and as such soon began to grow steadily in size and population. 2 centuries later, in 1345, the ford across the Clyde was replaced by a bridge built by Bishop Ray. It was so solidly made that it stood up to more than 5 centuries of wear and tear. Bishop Ray's bridge was the first great step forward in Glasgow's development as a major route centre. In the 15th century, the year was 1451, Glasgow became a seat of learning when Bishop Turnbull founded the University of Glasgow. For 300 years it stood in High Street. It looked like this. By 1650, the little ward had become a thriving town of half a dozen streets, with a cathedral, a university, and a population on the 7,000 mark. One traveller described it at this time as a noble town with a very fair situation and pleasant, abundant in garden herbs, apple trees, and orchards. Glasgow might well have remained a cathedral and university town for years to come, the St. Andrews of the West, but for the discovery of America and its subsequent colonization. Glasgow found itself no longer planted on the western edge of the world, on the shores of a mighty ocean that stretched to no one knew where. Glasgow was now across the Atlantic, from a new continent with which, in the 18th century, it prosperous trade. In 1740 and 1780, Glasgow's merchants made huge fortunes by importing from America half the tobacco smoked in Europe. Insolent and overbearing, the tobacco lords, as they were called, strutted along the streets dressed in scarlet cloaks, powdered wigs, cocked hats, and buckled shoes. It was in the days of the tobacco law that Glasgow began to make the Clyde, to transform it from a shallow salmon stream into a navigable river. The work of widening and deepening the channel by means of walls and jetties took 150 years to complete. If Glasgow made the Clyde a great international seaway, the Clyde in turn made Glasgow a great international seaport. There are 12 miles of tidal quays equipped to serve every type of ship, and each year the Port of Glasgow handles close on 16 million tons of cargo. This mechanical giant at General Terminus Quay is discharging a load of iron ore, which could have come from either Canada, North Africa, West Africa, Sweden or South America. It will go by rail to the blast furnaces of central Scotland for reduction to pig iron, and then on to the melting shops, the rolling mills and finishing mills for refinement of the finished product. High-quality steel. As iron ore comes in, coal goes out, though not in the huge quantities that were exported in the past. Here a ship loads up for a destination overseas. Here a puffer waits patiently in line for a cargo of coal which it will take to the Western Isles. Seaports have to move with the times if they are to prosper. There must be a quick turnaround of ships, up-to-date facilities for the speedy loading and unloading of cargoes. Glasgow has met the challenge of the times by providing large transit sheds and 5 commercial docks capable of handling all kinds of import and export goods. The bulk of river traffic is freight, but passengers are carried too, particularly on this regular cross-channel service to Belfast. Besides making Glasgow a great international seaport, the Clyde made Glasgow the centre of a great shipbuilding industry. From the 20-odd yards that line the lower reaches of the river come ships of all sizes and classes. The Clyde output of ships is greater than that of any other river in Britain. Tomorrow this ship will be launched. There's the final tidying up to be done. There's a last-minute welding job to be carried out. And, of course, there's the inevitable lick of paint to be given before one more Clyde-built ship glides down the slipway to the traditional shouts of good luck and Godspeed. The empty berth which it leaves behind is not so easily filled these days as it once was. Clydeside yards, like British yards in general, are facing fierce international competition, particularly from Japan. To meet this challenge, Clyde shipbuilders have in recent years spent £36 million in modernizing their equipment and streamlining their production methods. If the Clyde is to remain one of the great world shipbuilding centers, production costs must be kept to a minimum, delivery dates speeded up to the maximum. When the Clyde shipyards prosper, Glasgow prospers. Much work has already gone into the building of this ship, but much more is required to finish the job. This molten steel pouring from a Glasgow furnace will be used to make engines, component fittings. The steel will be taken still molten to the foundries where it will be shaped into frames, gear wheels and engine housings. This is a corner of one of the many foundries in and around Glasgow. The unfinished ship will also need, among other things, hawsers, ropes and anchor chains. The manufacture of these means work for many tradesmen in and around Glasgow. This chain-making works is within a stone's throw of the shipyards. Ships, whether diesel or steam-driven, require boilers. This has given rise to another important local industry, boiler making. Today, navigation is largely a matter of electronics. This Glasgow firm, once known throughout the world for its marine instruments, now specializes in the production of radar equipment. All ships, from luxury liners to the smallest cargo boats, need carpets. These, like engines, anchor chains and navigational instruments, can be supplied by local industry. For carpet making is one of Glasgow's most important manufactures. Carpets woven on looms like this one are to be found throughout the world in palaces and boardrooms, castles and cathedrals, as well as in the cabins and staterooms of ships. All these industries and scores more made modern Glasgow. As industry grew, so did commerce. Together, as if working in a kind of partnership, they brought prosperity to Glasgow and made it the capital of industrial Scotland. The rapid growth of the city in the 19th century brought prosperity. But it also left a legacy of social problems which are only today being gradually solved. Between 1800 and 1900, the population of Glasgow rocketed from 76,000 to 760,000. Acre upon acre of tenement houses, mostly of 1 or 2 rooms, were built to house the thousands who flooded into the boom town. Tenements were well built, in many cases too well built, for they outlived their day and left parts of Glasgow scarred and ugly. It is these scars, this ugliness, which have made visitors say harsh things about Glasgow. One writer wondered why anyone should ever want to go back to Glasgow. Glasgow, slum suburb of Dublin. Glasgow, a very dark place. Glasgow, dirty but vividly alive. These are some of the phrases used by visitors to describe Glasgow. One writer even went as far as to say that he was chilled to the bone by Glasgow's cliff and cavern-like courts and alleys. What steps has Glasgow Corporation taken to make the city a better and brighter place to live in? What has been done by past and present Lord Provosts and their councillors to make Glasgow a city where a visitor is no longer chilled to the bone by cavern-like courts and alleys, a city which anyone would like to go back to? First of all, on the fields and farmlands that once lay in the outskirts of Glasgow, thousands of new houses have been built in the past 20 years. Along with the houses went all the other amenities which make an area not just a housing scheme, but a township, a living community. Amenities like schools, shops, churches, open spaces, and the like. When there were no more fields or farmlands within the city boundaries on which to build, Glasgow Corporation took the next step in its long-term plan to give its citizens better homes and more breathing space. Through a series of rebuilding or redevelopment schemes, as they're called, Glasgow plans to demolish the old, overcrowded parts of the city where tumble-down houses, shops, factories, and warehouses are huddled together, and to rebuild them with fewer houses, fewer people, more open spaces. When completed, one of the new redevelopment areas, the Gorbals, will look like this. Within the next 20 years, Glasgow will have started a series of redevelopment schemes like the Gorbals. These will cost at least £200 million and will give a new look to 1/12 of the city. As with people, so with factories. The haphazard sprawl of industry will have been checked, and new factories will be built only in special reserved or zoned areas. The changing face of Glasgow. Glasgow on the move. These are 2 phrases which will be heard a lot in the days to come as the city pushes ahead with more and more of its redevelopment schemes. Redevelopment gives rise to the problem of overspill, the problem of finding new homes and new factory sites for those displaced in a redevelopment area. Overspill is a very serious problem, and Glasgow is tackling it vigorously. Through agreements reached with a number of towns in different parts of Scotland, Glasgow gives all the help it can to people and industrialists willing to move there. In return, these towns, like East Kilbride, provide houses, pleasant shopping centres and factory sites for an agreed number of displaced Glaswegians. Other towns prominently identified with overspill are Kirkintilloch, an old town rejuvenated, and Cumbernauld with its many new factories. To a city whose motto is, "Let Glasgow flourish," redevelopment presents one of the greatest challenges it has ever had to face in its long history. Redevelopment is a long-term policy, but ultimately it will change the face of Glasgow. Visitors will no longer speak of its cavern-like courts and alleys, or wonder why anyone should ever want to go back to Glasgow. The face of Glasgow may change drastically, but not its character. Character is something given to a city by its people, rather than its buildings. The Glaswegian has been described as an individualist, a stubborn, perverse fellow who insists on riding in the crowded bus, rather than on the empty one immediately behind, or going among the Celtic supporters at a football match and cheering for Rangers. He has also been described as tough but warm-hearted, a blunt, down-to-earth person with a commendable dislike of fuss, sham, and humbug. Whatever the Glaswegian is like, and it's impossible to generalize, his national team game is football, and the football ground of which he is especially proud is Hampden Park, the mecca of all football enthusiasts in Scotland. Every second year he goes on pilgrimage there to watch the game of the year, Scotland versus England. It was at Hampden Park in 1937 that a world record attendance at a football match was set up with a total of 149,500 spectators. Every year, and particularly during Glasgow Fair, many Glaswegians go on another pilgrimage, down the River Clyde on an excursion steamer. Those who are left behind, there is Glasgow Green, and the roundabouts that come for the fair. It was a 12th century bishop named Jocelyn who began Glasgow Fair, granting him and his successors the right to hold a fair or market for 8 days every July. Nowadays, the citizens of Glasgow don't go to buy or sell at the annual market as their forefathers did. They go to Glasgow Green for all the fun of the fair. Glasgow Green is the oldest of Glasgow's many parks. It dates back to 1662. If you owned a horse or a cow, you put it out to graze on the green. It was also used by fishermen for drying their salmon nets and by housewives for bleaching their towels and sheets and blankets. Today, there are close on 60 parks, almost one park for every square mile of streets and houses. This is no accident, but the result of deliberate and enlightened planning on the part of the civic authorities. Glasgow Corporation was quick to realize that a city as big and crowded as Glasgow required every lung or breathing space that could be provided. The older citizens needed them as places where they could relax and enjoy the feeling of being right in the heart of the countryside, though still in the heart of the town. Children need them too for healthy, recreative play, safe from the dangers of traffic. This boy, fording the paddling pool with pram and passenger, is an apt reminder of Glasgow's beginning, the hamlet by a ford which became the city of bridges. Scotland's busiest route centre. A great university city. Scotland's largest city. Scotland's industrial